some pretty cool visualizations that we put together using Windows Presentation Foundation. You actually got to see it if you watched Ray Ozzy's keynote. There was a little snippet of a bunch of cool WPF stuff, and so our demo was in there. And we're going to walk through the demo, show you what we've done, and then walk through why we did it, and then how we built it. And so Nathan and Josh from Identity Mine are going to help me out, and we'll go through that. So we're going to do this a little bit different. We're going to first start off with the demo. So as opposed to going through a bunch of slides, I thought I'd just show you the first part of the demo. We'll come walk through kind of what the motivation for building it was, and then we'll come back and finish off with another demo which shows how we've taken it, where we've taken it from that first incarnation. So the situation is the scenario is I've got a furniture manufacturer, and they're dealing with a vendor delivery that's been delayed. So I've got some vendor delivery. It didn't come in. It's a furniture manufacturer. How do I deal with that? And what do I do? And so I've got two personas, a purchasing manager and a production planner, and how do they interact inside of that scenario? So we will jump in and start that. So where we're going to start is we've added a gadget inside of Vista, so we've tried to integrate inside of Vista wherever we can. Up on the right-hand side here is a list of all the events that are happening in the system. And in the events, I've got 100 pieces of white oak that are not being delivered. So 100 pieces of white oak haven't been delivered. What am I going to do about that? So we give them a little bit more information, but beyond more than just the information, I also let them take action so they can jump right into the application, into the appropriate place for that event to go do some work. So the first place I want to go to is I'm going to go in and move to the purchase order and adjust my date. This will pop up the purchase order, and we can resize some of our screen stuff here. So for some reason, my screen got updated a little bit differently. So we've got a list of the line items. I can see information on the right-hand side over here with more information on the picture, the unit cost, what's available. I've got vendor contact information on the right-hand side. I can click on this and give Patricia a call. It'll automatically use Communicator and call her and and connect to her. I can talk to her for a little while. And it actually is dialing the phone on my office in Redmond right now. I've called this person a number of times. I don't know who they are, but but I've got that information. I talk to her. It says, hey, my date's moved back. I need to go move my date. We've added a capability we called fast tabs. It's a little bit washed out on the screen, but I've got a number of tabs with information. So one is for shipping. And that shipping information has got all of the people that it's going to. But if I expand that, I can see more detailed information on shipping, and I can go in and update the date. And so I need to move this to a date in June when she's going to actually deliver this to me, and I can go in and click on the update there. So I'll update the date. And from that perspective, she's kind of done her job, connected, got the information, updated the date. Well, this causes a lot of ramifications across the system. So how do I go in and change the person to be able to go in and look through the components of the system? And where I'm going to go is to Eduardo's homepage. So Eduardo is the production planner. He's got a homepage that gives him a list of all the work that he needs to do. The top area is a set of activities. There's a BI information that is a number of production orders that are planned, released, high-cost production orders, changes that have occurred. One of those is delayed supply. That's what we're going to go work with. A number of charts and graphs on the right. I've got integration to Outlook as well, so I can see anything that's going on there. If I wanted to jump directly to my calendar, I can jump to my calendar and grab that information. And I can jump into the delayed supply, which is something that's really important for me if I'm a production planner, is delayed supply causes me issues with the production plan and in manufacturing. What do I go do? So I've got a list of all the orders that are delayed, quite a few of them, and a couple of them have got an indication that they're delayed by quite a bit. We've got some nice information on the right-hand side. As I switch through, I can get more detailed information. Our partners can add more information on the right-hand side as they customize the application on the right-hand side. I can do some filtering here, so I can do type-ahead filtering to get down to the items that I want to. So I know it was an oak board. How do I get to the oak board? I also have all the warnings that are critical, and I can navigate automatically. So if I have a long list of information in a list, and these lists are consistent across the whole product. And so I'm going to go in and optimize my plan. What do I do to optimize my plan? And this will pop up the user interface for doing that. Now, what we've taken is, actually, you can't see very well up there, but what we've taken is on a graphical display of the order and what's happening. And so I've got date going up on the side. If I hover over the top of one of these items at the bottom, so here's the 100 pieces of white oak, and up on the top-hand side, the selected quantity, when I hover over the top, gives me how much is there, who's it coming from, what's the remaining quantity. That 100 pieces goes to 80 cut oval data Sydney desk oval desktop. There's an assembly for 40 Sydney desks, and then it goes to a sales order, and then on to one of my gold customers. And so I'm tracking. My screen just went blank. That's better. I'm tracking the information for the colors that are in gold up here means that I don't have inventory that I can allocate to this person. In blue means that I do have an allocation that's in my production plan. I'll be going to go do that for them. So I've also got my list of delayed sales orders over here on the right-hand side. Well, if I want to see this a little bit better, I can click on the 100 pieces of white oak board, and it'll draw me a picture of all the places where that was going in and impacting my system. So wherever I've got a relationship into a sales order, into an assembly step, I can see what's happening. On the left-hand side, I've got all my information that's in stock. So I have 60 pieces of white oak board in stock. On the left-hand side, when I click on that, I can see what's happening there. And most of that is going to my bronze customers. I'd like to do something different with them. If I click on the 40, I can see that I've got it all going into 35 items in stock, as well as a couple of my bronze customers. So there's an opportunity for me to move something. If I want to get a little bit better view of this, I can tilt it and pivot it. I can zoom it in. I can look at what's going on, and I can actually get a real good feel for what's happening, a 3D model of the production plan and what's going on, what can I do with it. Now, I wish I had a better screen up here, a better resolution, but there's this really nice glass. You can actually see through it. It's a full 3D model of the product. I can go back into a view here that's a 2D view, or I can pop back to the 3D view. So it's nice that I can see it, but I'd actually like to take some action, do something about this, and actually get something over to the gold and silver customers. So if I grab 40, so I can pick it up, so I can grab some allocation, and it gives me an indication with a couple little dropped areas. One of them's right here, and then one of them over here, 2 places that I can drop this piece of allocation and reallocate it to somewhere else. So I'll select over on the right-hand side, and I'm given a little area right here where I can see the numbers. I can zoom in and out. I can also adjust this. And when I do that, you can see that it's actually flowing that information across the whole plan, and you can see the impact of moving it and what it affects my plan and how it moves forward. So kind of information you really couldn't get before. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and move all 40 of them up there. Once I click over to the right-hand side, I can see areas where I had 2 options. I could have actually put 40 over here because I had 80 and I'm only half filling it. I've also have some more that were going to this side. So again, I can adjust that to the other side, and you can see it flowing back and forth between the 2 areas and how it's going to go in and affect my plan. So I'll go ahead and commit those changes. When I commit the changes, it gives me a set of pending reallocations. So here's the allocations of what I was going to do, how the changes I'm going to make, and that's what will be put on to my production planning model after that. So I've got one more change here. I can move the 20 items, move them to the right-hand side. You can see that I've satisfied all my silver and gold customers. I've appropriately screwed my bronze customers, and life is good. So that's kind of basically the first step in the demo that we did. I'm going to walk through now just kind of how did we get to this, have guys come up and show how we built it, and then we'll walk through a more advanced demo of kind of where we took it from here after that point. So let me get going here. So what was the first thing we did? First thing we had to do was understand the problem. So we spent a lot of time. In fact, one of the designers on our team in Copenhagen, got a team, actually my team is spread across Copenhagen, Fargo, North Dakota, and in Redmond. So we're doing true global development across all those locations. But one of the developers, or user experience guys there, spent a lot of time with production planner just trying to understand what is the problem, what do you guys try to do, what are the challenges you run into. And the real issue is it's the complexity of what these guys have to deal with. They've got supply, it's delayed, it's defective, it's missing, they've got some in stock. How do they keep all this stuff in their head, and how do they understand what's going on? Customer orders. There's a bunch of things going out. There's a bunch of things coming in. There's different priorities for my different customers. How do I make sure that I understand what's going on with these customers and how I'm affecting my different types of customers when I'm working with the product? The production planning environment's looking at resource allocations across the whole environment. So different machine tools and different things that might be building it. Are they available? Are they not available? So there's a lot of aspects that were even more complicated than the picture that I showed that are actually playing into the plan of how do I build a production plan. We need to get material reservations on those production orders. But really what I was producing at the end of that was a set of recommendations to the production planning engine. I wasn't actually changing the plan because the complexity is a lot harder. I was actually saying, we recommend that you put higher priority on these. When you run the full plan, it actually might tweak it a little bit more once the algorithm runs to go try to figure out how to do that. Resources might not be available, machines, people, et cetera. And then we do the production scheduling updates at the end. So spent a lot of time understanding the problem. Second thing he did was said, okay, what's the current reality today? ERP applications are great. I've been working on them for a long time, but they've got some problems as well, which is there's lots of forms, lots of lists, lots of stuff, and it's hard to tell how all this stuff ties together. And so we need to do something to be able to try and fix that problem. Can't understand the relationships. Some data you can only find in reports. It actually doesn't even come up in a form. And sometimes you don't have all of the relationships, so you can navigate to understand them. But bottom line is there's too many things to think about, and you have to have some way to try and bring it together. So step 3 was kind of try to define the requirements and then try and understand that pain. So first thing we wanted to do is create a one-stop shop for all the data that I need to know to deal with the fact that supply is delayed. So I can't remember to go one of the things the user might say is, I can't remember all the places I need to go to get the data. So that's one of the things he heard from lots of people. I can't remember where I need to go. Okay, what do we need to do? We need to bring it all to you in one spot so you know where to go. Second thing, show me the relationships that exist between data. I don't understand how all these things are tied together. I don't understand the 100-piece the purchase order that didn't come in, the impact on actually the process of creating the end stuff that we're going to ship to the user. So I can't tell how changes impact my plan today. Show me how they do. We need to build a visual bridge from ERP data to an understandable view. So how do we take that? I need a picture to better understand it. So people might say, what I do when I actually look at all the data is I draw a picture. And that's what I do to try and solve the problem. So that they're drawing a picture from our data, we should draw the picture for them up front. Only show me a subset of the data that affects my situation. In the demo that I showed, we looked at the fact that we have 100 pieces of white oak board that aren't there. There's lots and lots of material. But we just took the subset of the production plan that deals with white oak board and how white oak board flows through the system. We took a nice cut from that. So that basically I need a better picture to understand. I want to deal with the smallest amount of data I can to make smart decisions. And then allow me to take from within the visualization what I can understand, take action. So I've got a visualization. Now I could have said, hey, go over and make these changes wherever you want to in the form. But we tried to take it to the next step is, I don't want to have to remember where to go to make that change. Let me change it right from within that. And so we tried to, within the 3D model, allow you to go in and change it. So that was kind of the requirements that we were seeing. So step 4 is just build a vision for how are we going to go do this. And so these are actually the hand drawings that the designer on our team came up with, but instead of tabular data, we want to get to an intuitive visualization. So I want to be able to see the material, the production plan, the schedule, reservations. I want to have intuitive drag and drop, and how am I going to go do that? He put together a little visualization that actually is a number of different screenshots. So it's like, okay, I can do this. I want to be able to tilt it and see the height and how much material is in each place. I want to select them. I want to change the lines. I want to adjust the bar, move things around. How can I go do this? But we basically mocked this all up in writing, kind of in by hand on paper of here's all the different places how this would work, and created this interaction. Once we did that, we said, let's go try and build it and turn it from what's on paper into something real. And to do that, we hired Identity Mine. And I think the next area we're going to talk about is how we went from this mock-up to actually taking it into some cool thing that you could actually work with inside of WPF. So Nathan's going to talk next about what he did during that process.
All right. Can you guys hear me? Good. I think I can hear me. So I want to talk a little bit. Josh is going to come and talk about the developer story and the experience and how we did this. I'm going to talk really quickly about how I plugged into the process, and we'll talk about the time frame and when we did this. We actually, I believe it was just a month of work that we did on this project. Most of that time was development, and there was 1 week that I committed to it. I committed more time through the process. I actually was, reviewing, understanding the requirements, getting my head around the domain. Those wireframes that came in, the storyboards, I saw those really early on. And then I just basically started watching the drops that the developer was doing. So as the developer was building this up, I was saying, okay, I need this to be exposed to me. This is surface area that a designer is going to care about. I see some fatal flaws in some of the ways that this is being pulled off. So I kept, as it was being fleshed out, I was calling out for requirements that would allow me to design the pieces that I needed. At the end of the process, I came in and everything was hooked up the way I needed it to, and it was a really smooth experience. I think one of the things that I really enjoyed about this experience was how well they defined the requirements up front, and one of the things I want to actually point out, when you're defining requirements for a 3D data visualization, you got to understand 3D. You can't just assume you're going to come into this world of 3D and it's I'm going to use another piece of metaphor to start designing these things. 3D is just like full of pitfalls. You get into things where it's just like interaction with the user is really tough. The actual data visualization gets is actually not as good in some cases in 3D. There's actual data that you can read better in other scenarios. But really understanding what the value is, and that's something that I felt like was really well defined up front. People understood that this was a data visualization that made sense. There was actual true value to it. The actual interaction and the dynamicness of the data visualization made a lot of sense. And that's something I've run into before where people are like, okay, we want a 3D data visualization. I'm like, why do you want it? What's the motive behind it? And the answer is usually because it's 3D and it's cool. So that was great to get into that. The people we were working with were awesome, and they had a lot of experience working with 3D before, and so they were able to roll with some of the, when I was coming in, some of the interaction requirements saying, yeah, this isn't going to work. There wasn't this, no, but we really want it this way. There was a lot of, yeah, I totally understand. Let's see what we can do the best thing. And they also were able to, really brainstorm, ping back and forth with new ideas. So I call this trying to understand what metaphors work. We use a lot of different metaphors when we're designing. We call things pages because that's a metaphor that makes sense to us. We talk about, bar charts and things that make sense to us. When you get into 3D, you start to realize that, we use color metaphor all the time. And color metaphor becomes really difficult to design with because in 3D, there's so much interdependency with that color metaphor. So that really started me down a path of trying to figure out, well, here's our design. We've got this concept of red and blue. And if you look, there's a concept of kind of sketched out, so there's some transparency there. So we pretty much figured that there's a couple states in here, and we're going to be able to design the 3D up using red and blue and transparency. That's kind of where we thought we were going to go with. And we just do different scales of transparency, and that would define the different states. So like when you mouse over something, it become a little more opaque. And when you select something, it'd be a different set of opacity. And then dependency would be different. When you actually get into that problem, you realize that it's a pretty hard problem to solve. And so we started brainstorming a lot of different metaphors that would allow for all the different states. We came up with the batteries and tubes metaphor. We initially went down with the batteries concept because it's something that you're trying to fulfill, and batteries always need to be charged and fulfilled, and there's like a completeness to that. So we went down that. We used colors that made sense in the scenario. The color issue is a really interesting issue because there's branding issues that want to be brought in. There's actual usability issues and accessibility issues with color. So we ended up going with orange and blue, and the reason with the orange and blue was mostly because there was a lot of branding across the Dynamics platform that we went with. So this is the screen. I'm going to actually, when I show this on my laptop, I think this is going to get a little bit better because I'm running at a lower resolution. That's one thing. This is actually a really beautiful app. It's getting washed out here, and as a designer, I'm like, I want you guys to know how actually beautiful this is. In the very front here, you see we've got, this is hard to see, but This is a empty tube, and it's just this pure tube of glass. And the orange is showing what our requirements are, and the blue is showing what are fulfilled. Like I said, we thought we were going to be doing 2 different colors, but this is what we actually ended up having to create brushes for all of these kinds of states that you could find yourself in. You could find yourself in a required state. When things became disabled, you couldn't interact with them. We needed to highlight that somehow. We needed to show filled. We needed to show filling. We wanted to show filling differently. We realized when you're showing the data visualization that filling just wasn't showing up. You couldn't actually determine it apart from the filled states, and so it was really hard. We had to actually think about different metaphors for those. After something was committed, it needed to stand out. We have a concept of phantom, meaning it's not there yet. I can't remember. I've got that in there because we actually used it, but there's the selected, the dependencies, the selected dependencies, and selected hover, all these different ones. Also, when we show this in a second here, you're going to see that the experience, when we look at how many resources I had to manage and design with, it's going to be a pretty long list. So making it blendable is a really important part for the designer, and this is just, if you can keep your projects blendable, you can run a lot faster than you could if you have to do these by hand. Specifically in this scenario where there were so many different states that you have to design to, and you have to make sure every single one of those states works. I had to, early on I was designing this, and I was realizing I was having to do about 10 clicks before I could actually get to a point where I could check to see if my state worked in the data visualization. And my hand was really hurting, just doing it over and over and over again. So I had to come up with a scenario that allowed me to actually see WYSIWYG, what I was designing. And what I ended up coming with, we're using it in Blend. This is great. One of the great uses of WPF is that we have great toolability. And when I was using this in Blend, what I ended up having to do at the time, the project that we created, and this is WinForms WPF interop. The data visualization is created in WPF, and the actual application is built in WinForms. So when I built this, when we were building this, Blend actually couldn't support the project file that we were working with. We'd build it in Visual Studio, but I actually couldn't open this up in Blend. What's great now is that since the latest build, I actually installed the build to the bits that came in the box, and it opens up just fine. Hit F5, and it runs right out of it. So it's really cool. But at the time, I didn't have that. So what I had to do is create a test harness application that had a test page, and this is my test page. I'm going to jump into a demo machine here, and I'm on B, I believe. Or let's try C or D.
You're D.
I'm D. Great, that's me. All right, so here's the project in Blend. I'm going to be jumping back and forth between this mini mode so you can actually see what I'm editing. But these are how I created all my different states. And I could test the glassiness of the state. I could test the colors that we were using, how well the color is actually shown through the glass. As you can see that there's the glass is kind of, over here, it's very just, transparent glass, and here it gets a little bit bluer. What we've got is multiple materials. We're actually nesting multiple materials inside the glass and using emissive materials to create a glowing, ramped-up effect, which was great because that glowing, ramped-up effect really affected the materials underneath. So let me show you the resources that we used, and what basically the workflow ended up being was I just shared the same resource library that the real application was using. Since I was designing this in an application that was my test harness, I just made sure to grab the resource dictionary that stored all the materials for the 3D objects, and it stored all the same materials for all the models and the geometries that we were using in the application. So this is my graph resources test page, and there's a graph resources Graph 3D here. So I'm just going to go to Resources panel. So you see my Graph 3D resources here. These are all the brushes that we use to manage this. So it actually became, it can be optimized a lot better, and it probably has been as they've developed it further. But within Blend, you can see over here, I'm just going to move this up so we can see that a little bit better. Within Blend, I can actually get to these resources and get to an editing experience for each of these. So if I look at my item required brush and open that up, you can see it's parked on an orange color here, and we can see my orange colors right here. As I just change the colors, you can see I can update the actual resources. And if I F5 this app to run it, This is a much older build of the app. But there I've now updated the required color to be green. And so that was the process I had to do. I was just basically testing each of those colors. I was messing around with the emissive materials when I'm looking at my glass and all this stuff. Like right in here, you just had to make sure all the colors actually shone through that and that the emissive colors actually worked. What are you on?
C.
You're on C? All right. So some of the interesting challenges I ran into on this. One is what I call the Polzer effect. And basically what this was is when we were originally going down that battery path where this thing was we basically tried to simulate the concept of the battery where the end sticks out a little bit. And then we started seeing this visualization where, wow, if you actually show, the concept of containership where the requirement and the fulfilled is like a different size container and one is growing out of the other one, it actually was a really good data visualization. You could look at it and you could really get the data well, and you could see it from far away, and you could start mapping what was happening. Problem was it actually implied some things that we didn't want to, and we actually passed it around. We were doing 25-cent usability constantly through this progress, and we were having a bunch of people test this and say, okay, yeah, I can actually see the data, which is I highly recommend is that there's a lot of things you think is a really good idea. You got to get people testing it and iterating it as you're building it, which is one of the benefits of using WPF is that you can do that kind of testing. So we built this thing up, passed it around, and I was in Copenhagen at the time for this project, and they said, it looks like a Polzer. And I was like, what's a Polzer? I've never seen a Polzer. A Polzer is a hot dog that they sell on the streets in Denmark, and it really did look like a Polzer. I went out and I looked at Polzers, and it really did, and I could understand that it just wasn't the appropriate metaphor for the project. This is the other thing that we ran into. We actually did a lot of work to make that glass scenario work. I'm going to try to mouse this around with my trackball. Let's see here. Yeah. Okay, this is a good talking point. I just flipped that. We actually did a lot of work to also constrain the interaction, and I actually just ran into a scenario where I didn't constrain the interaction. You can, with the user interaction, you want to make sure you lock things. I think, Josh, you talked about this a little more. Okay. I was going to show the glass, but there's a reflection that's actually on the chessboard layout that's underneath, and there's the glass on the glass of the tubes themselves. What ended up happening is as this thing moved into different states, the shininess of the glass started occluding the data, so you couldn't actually see something. And it was really hard to get that, to maintain a look of glass and to actually maintain, we really wanted the feel of glass so that the metaphor actually carried through. Maintain that and still actually show the data. And what really happened, one of the interesting challenges that I ran into was realizing that the interdependency of colors and materials is so interwoven with each other. You've got materials, you have lights, you have the model shape and the opacity of the models. All of those things interact with each other in a way that, if I want to make things more shiny, I need to change the lighting that I've used, which means I need to change the opacity that I set on the materials, which means I need to change the colors that I use, which then ripples through all the different states of colors. But otherwise, that's one of the importance of making sure that this stuff stays blendable inside of the expression tool so that you can really move fast on this, because you just got to be able to tweak these things over and over and over until you get into that magic view of it. So that's what I have. I think we're going to have Josh come up. Or
if you had one more, you've done.
Oh.
Yep. So Josh was going to come up and just talk a little bit about 4 or 5 things that from a developer's perspective, what we did there, and then I'll come back at the end and we'll show the full demo at the end.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Okay, so let's just jump right in here. So when we looked at the mock-ups and all that that we saw earlier, we realized that the data needed to be very dynamic. They wanted to bind in the actual information about the different materials and all those types of things, right? So the slide's actually cut off a tiny bit here, but so we started with a list of materials. We realized we had a list of data, and we needed to get that data into 3D. And so what we did here is the actual entire control, and I'll show you a little bit of this in XAML, the 3D viewport that you see actually is part of a control template for a items control. So we derived from items control, which gave us the items source property. And for those who aren't super familiar with WPF, items control is the base class for things like list box and combo box controls that contain a set of data. We derived from that, created a template that I'll show you in just a little bit that contained the viewport 3D, bound in the XML that actually describes the materials data, enumerated that XML, and generated 3D models from that data. So for each item in the XML, we generate a 3D model and inserted that into the viewport. Let me show you. Okay, so the actual derived type is list3D, so we derived from items control, created list3D. And then the control template for list3D is actually the viewport 3D. So this is the viewport 3D is the control you use to actually render a 3D scene in WPF. So, and you can see here, this is kind of part underscore is a naming convention used in WPF to indicate that this control needs to be here in the template. There's going to be code that's actually grabbing this control and doing something with it. So within the items control, read in the XML, create the model, grab a reference to this viewport, and add the models to the viewport. And as changes occur, if you load in new XML, models are regenerated, new models added to the viewport. Okay, so Nathan showed you all the resources that he used and he tweaked in Blend. When the control was built, we created the control to use these resources, although obviously at that point they weren't very pretty, right? So the workflow that we take a lot when we're doing projects like this is, as we're building the custom controls, we are using resources that the developer creates that are just, you know, white brushes or whatever they might be. And then the designer comes back, and because we've factored these things out into resource dictionaries, and that's what Nathan was actually editing when he changed the brushes that are used on those models, then the designer can just go in, change the resource dictionary, rebuild, and the control is already, you know, reaching out into XAML to grab those resources instead of creating those things in code. And that's a great pattern to follow, even when you're not doing 3D. Anytime you're doing things that you want your designer to be able to change, is put those in resource dictionaries, and then they're very toolable. The designer can come in after the fact and change the way everything looks, and it will just keep working. Okay, so if you came to Jonathan and my talk yesterday, this is a little bit of a repeat about how you do hit testing in 3D, but so in 3D, you don't get all the standard input events that you would expect in 2D. So like in 2D, if you have a button or something like that and you mouse over it, you get a mouse over event, right? Or a mouse enter event and mouse move and mouse leave. In 3D, as you mouse over those models, like we saw in the demo, you don't get any events there. You get mouse move of the viewport 3D is all you get. So then you need to take those events on the 2D control and actually hit test into 3D. So let me show you. Let's actually run the app and show you this. Okay, so here's our test harness app. And actually, you can see the glass a little bit better on my machine here. You can kind of see the sheen that Nathan was talking about as it rotates there, or the shininess. Okay, so here, as we're moving around, we're receiving input events for the viewport only, right? And on mouse move, for every mouse move, we're then hit testing into the 3D scene. So when you use a class called Visual Tree Helper, has a method called hit test, and you hit test the 2D point over the viewport into the 3D scene. And that the result of that hit test is the models that were hit. So here, you know, we're mousing over and we're hit testing in and determining that this model was hit and applying a mouse over state to that model. Similarly, when you grab one of these things, we're hit testing in, determining it's, you hit the model, you're now moving, and then we're initiating a drag process. So here what's actually happening is to move this model in 3D, we're applying transforms to that model. So we're translating the 2D mouse movements into a 3D transform that actually moves the model around the scene. And then as you mouse up, we're initiating this drop process that actually moves the data, and the data bindings update the visualization. So doing hit testing in 3D is a little more difficult than 2D, obviously. There's a lot more involved, and hopefully in a future version of WPF, they'll have a little more of this stuff baked in where you'll get events from models and things like that. But for now, it's all up to you, and you're doing all this stuff yourself. Okay, so as was said earlier, this is a WPF control that's actually embedded in a WinForms app. And that's actually very easy to do using a control in WPF called Element Host, which is a WinForms control that allows you to host WPF content. And let me show you some code here. Okay, so here we've created, this is actually in the WinForms application, created the element host control, added that to the controls of the form, and then actually created the tree graph chart 3D control, which is the WPF control, and added that as the child of the element host. And what you can see here is we're actually adding a bunch of event handlers to that control. So because WinForms is .NET and WPF is .NET, as long as you're exposing standard CLR events off of your WinForms control or CLR properties, you can attach to those events and access those properties from within WinForms. Things like routed events that you get in WPF that will route through the visual tree don't route up out of WPF, obviously, and into WinForms. So you need to support standard CLR events and properties in order to get the nice interaction here. So you can see that, actually, do we? Yeah, so here you can see as the mouse over event is firing, it's raising this data up to the WinForms app, which is actually this left pane of this test harness app. And the WinForms app is responding to those events that are occurring within WPF and displaying data in WinForms. So it's actually very straightforward to create rich WPF data visualizations like this and embed them into existing WinForms applications. And, or any other technology. The same type of thing can be done with Win32 apps. And I think that's all I've got.
You ready? Okay. Okay. So I'm going to jump into the next step in the demo. So we built this base demo. We actually showed it to a bunch of customers, talked to a bunch of people, started getting feedback, and said, okay, well, that's nice, that's really cool. Never thought I could see something like that, but it still isn't good enough. I'd like to see something a little bit more. So I'm going to go back in now. We'll start over, and we're going to go in and optimize the plan again. And what it shows here on the right-hand side, I tried switching the resolutions. Hopefully you can see better. It'll be a little bit tougher to move things around. But on the right-hand side, we added a bunch of key performance indicators. So one of the things that would be nice to know as I'm making all these changes and making adjustments is what's happening in here. So we capture the percent of profitability, percent of customer sat, the percent of orders that have been delivered, so of the total number of orders, how many am I actually delivering, and then the percent of items as well. So I've got a number of different metrics that I can track around the product. And so we'll go ahead and then do the same process over here. We'll transition over. I'm going to grab that 40 pieces of material. I'm going to drop it over on the right-hand side, and you'll see that the graph opens, and now it's flashing around, trying to figure out how to do the screen resolution. So you can see that I've got the graphics on the right. Now, if I make some decisions like I want to move this down and only take 34 of them, we can see that it goes down. If If I move a little bit more, I come down a little bit more. Now this control on the right's pretty cool. It was actually built by, wow, it's not handling my screen output very well. Sorry about that. Now we know why I had it in the version where you couldn't see. All right. So I've moved that over to the right-hand side, but as I move those around, I can see how this is affecting the plan, and it will actually automatically adjust. Microsoft Research built this control on the right-hand side, and we haven't shipped it yet, but we're going to ship it as part of it. But it does nice, smooth transitions between the two different components. So I'll go ahead and make those changes and commit those changes. And so that was great. I could go in and see what was happening there. I could continue to go in and tweak it and change this and move things around and zoom in and out on stuff and try and figure out how do I manually adjust this plan to be exactly the way I wanted it to be. But that's not really what we wanted to be able to do. Part of it is if I actually have some goal in mind, something I'm trying to go after, well, could I optimize the plan with the program to actually solve the problem? So in this case, I was going after the order sequence. So in the order that they were coming in, that's what I was optimizing from, and then I was taking manual steps from there. But I wrote some optimization algorithms as well. So if I want to get the most orders, so what's the most orders I can ship out of here, I've got an optimization algorithm that goes ahead and says, what are we going to do for most orders? So we run that. It's all run in real time. It's calculating what's the most orders. And you can see how it adjusted the plan over here on the right-hand side. And you wouldn't have probably never figured out that that's what I needed to do. In addition to that, I've got a set of all the different adjustments I need to make, which is 19 here, 4 here. You probably wouldn't have figured out, and I've only got 2 delayed orders in this model. Now, we also did one for most items. And so if I go ahead and open this back up and look for most items, you can see what the flow is there. So it adjusts the KPIs. You can see that. If I want to fulfill customers, how does that get changed? So I can change those components. If I want to maximize my profit, what would I do? So a bunch of different optimization algorithms. The goal is that if people want to add additional ones, they can add additional optimization strategies as well, and they can put that into the product for how to optimize it. But the ability to get real-time KPIs as I'm making either manual adjustments or starting from here, I can also take the changes here and then start to tweak manually, and I actually am running 5 different versions at the same time. And that's kind of visualizable by going to do a side-by-side KPI comparison. I don't know if you guys saw how that transition worked, but it's pretty sweet. So you just kind of flow over there. So that's cool. But now I've got all of them side by side. So I can see the order sequence, fulfill customers, maximize profit, most orders, most items, all side by side, and see how they compare to each other. And what's nice is I might forget what's happening on the left-hand side. So if I wanted to remember, we actually made this clickable as well. So if I click on order sequence, it's dynamically updating the left-hand side. It actually, at the same time, if I had more screen real estate, you'd see that it's dynamically updating my reallocations and orders. And so if I go back over here, select that I want to get the most orders, and I go ahead and collapse that, I can see I've only got 2 orders there. So all the items are kept in sync. All the data is kept in sync, and I can tell what's going on. But I can fulfill customers, get the most items, get the most orders. So it's all dynamically kept up to date, which is pretty nice. The other thing is I might have gone in with the goal believing that I wanted to get 100% of my customers satisfied or doing the best job I can on customers, which would be this one, which is all my gold and silver customers, which is the demo you saw earlier. But profitability on that one is only at 54%. So I'm only getting 54%. If I go over to most items, so if we click on most items, you can see what that looks like. But most items gives me 90% customer satisfied, and I think it's 66% profitability. So I can make some more money. I can go do that. Now, I could also say I want to take some factor in terms of how I would weight each one of these metrics against each other, and I could move to a stacked KPI. So I'd create a stacked KPI, and I can actually look at those. And in this case, the way I've weighted them is most items actually shows up on top, and is the one that I should select here, which I probably never would have known, especially if I was doing this thing manually. I never would have been able to figure that out. So be able to basically, the extension was we added KPIs, dynamically can understand what's going on in real time as I'm making the changes, allow you to do comparison between all the different options that you've got, as well as to allow us to do the actions. A couple of other things I can do is, let's say I wanted to grab some of this resource and drop it over on this side over there. there's some kind of advanced calculations I can do as I'm moving these different elements across. So if I have left, I can left and right. I basically can create pairing, and I drag the wrong way. But you can actually get, if you do the right one, you can end up with five of these selected at the same time, where there's 5 different places, and you can pick between them and adjust the numbers back and forth between them. So it's been kind of fun as we created this, had this original vision, started doing the work, and then we just like, oh, we could do this, we could add that. And really, most of this app was built by about 2 or 3 people over the course of the last 4 or 5 months, and not full-time. So the guy does it as his part-time job because it wasn't on the schedule. I've now got it on the schedule, so we're going to ship it in the next release of Dynamics NAV. Ship this part of the product. But really, a lot of excitement so far from being able to see this. One last thing I wanted to show you. This thing's been kind of hanging up here, a little smiley face thing the whole time. You've probably been wondering what this is. This is just something we put together with our usability team, which you might want to consider when you're working with people on new stuff. Nathan talked about the importance of getting feedback, but I can click on the little smiley face, and it basically lets me put in a note that says, yeah, I was happy, this was really cool. I can go ahead and send that. And what it does is it captures actually a copy of the screenshot. So if I go back over, it's sending. I should get mail here in a second because I have it set up to send to me. You can see I actually have a lot of mail that I haven't read with 2,227 items. You can get a little email, and it grabs a copy of the screenshot. So it was a real low-budget way to basically say, I'm in a spot, I don't know where I'm at, I want to be able to get some feedback. So that's a really good opportunity to get some feedback from customers as much as you can. Another fun thing we did around customer feedback, which is a good thing, I think a best practice you might want to think about doing in the future. We really do a lot of work around collecting feedback from customers on surveys, and actually a number of you probably put those in when Microsoft asks you. We actually use that. In fact, my compensation is based on that. So hopefully, even if you feel bad, tell us so we can fix it so that we can get better pay. And also, it's really important that we do a good job and try and build this up. And so one of the things we added was this thing called Speak Your Mind. We did it at our Convergence conference and basically allowed customers to just walk into a little video booth and start talking. And then we captured we took voice to text, and we actually have it all searchable. And so I could actually search from that with a little search engine, and I can get back and find the person where the person's actually talked. And I didn't turn on the audio, but this guy's saying something about Navision that he really likes or doesn't. But it's just a nice way to get feedback. But one of the things is we're trying to do is create a real role-tailored experience for how you're going to use your applications and move them forward. And any way we can get feedback is something we should do. And it's just a best practice, I think, for people to do in the future. So last couple of slides, and then we can take some questions. So kind of adding more business value was that part I showed the demo. So this is a little summary. But we delivered real-time decision support, keep KPIs with rich transitioning visualization, so they move back and forth. You can see what's happening. You can see that it actually changed. If you just change stuff like this immediately, you can't actually tell that something changed, especially if it was a subtle change. So the ability for that thing to just move as you make the change. And the same thing with the design of the layout on the left-hand side, same thing there. We added optimization algorithms as well. First thing people came up to, they see that we were dragging around, well, that's great, but why can't the computer do that for me? Well, now the computer can do it for you, but you still have the power to manage that control yourself. And so a nice way to put automatic processes together with manual processes in the same spot. And then the multi-way interactive visualization, so I can see the data in multiple ways, is another piece we did. So kind of a summary. This is my summary. I'm not on the WPF team, but I actually think WPF is damn cool, and it transforms business applications. You can change the way that customers visualize data. I showed the screenshot earlier, but you really can't think about this whole problem in one spot. And we've actually allowed people to think about the problem by getting it into a visualization, making it 3D, let them see how many there are, where they are, what's fulfilled, what's not fulfilled, and how we can move it forward. So that's really cool. You can change the way customers interact with their business data. I can actually, in that visualization of where I'm looking at my business data, I can start to change it and move things around. That's pretty powerful. You can change the way they understand the implications of their work. I make a change. Now what happens? How did that affect my profitability? How did that affect how my customer sat's going to be? What happened as a result of making this one change? Dynamically, I can go do that. You can change just the way that they think about systems in the future. We did this demo at 2 conferences, actually, but the last one, the reaction was incredibly positive from people. I've flown to Canada, I went to Spain, I'm going to Germany at the end of next month, and we're going to large organizations that are running our product in one of their subsidiaries, maybe have 5 or 6 different CIOs, and they're asking us to come present this to their CIO board. So as they're doing meetings with all their CIOs, what's going on? And they're basically saying, look, this is the way our systems can work in the future. This is how they could help us in the future. This is what could happen. So I think we really did a nice job of creating a real-world situation that allows you to do real business application value add and WPF. And it's not just glitz. It's not just a bunch of fancy 3D stuff, even though we tried to do that too. But the reality was we were really trying to solve a business problem, and that was the goal from the start, was can we solve a business problem and make it better? And I think we did, and I think people were excited by that. And I think the other thing that you'll see is an unprecedented level of synergy between designers and developers in the future. In the past, being a developer for the last 25 years, I thought I was a UI guy, and probably still do, actually. But, you just go do stuff. But really, the reality is now designers can actually get involved and think about the lighting and think about the colors and the metaphors and what's going to happen and how could the person understand it better, do user research. And that's going to allow you to build better visualizations in the future. And they're going to look better, they're going to be more understandable, they'll be more productive, and at the end of the day, they'll be more fun to use, and that's what you really want at the end. So I think that's all we had, which was, I think we're ahead of schedule quite a bit. So you can ask us lots of questions, or you guys could go get something to eat or jump into another session. Yeah. You guys might want to come up in case you want to answer questions.
I have a question for Identity Mine. Actually, I know we talked about that already, but you mentioned keeping the application blendable as long as possible, meaning you should be able to see, like if you have a list view with data items bound, data bound, you should be able to see the items. So can you say a few words about how you achieve that in the development scenario where maybe you don't have the server connections? So you told me something about simulation.
Yeah, really, it's just a trade-off. As much as you can keep it so it's a WYSIWYG environment is as fast. When you get to the point where you're tweaking, really honestly, I do a day of construction and then 10 days of tweaking. And so if you can get to that point where you're tweaking, you can reduce that. That's what the goal is. So simulating the experience was really important. The actual test page I have there is kind of simplified for what I actually used. I had the chessboard, I had every single piece, so I could move that thing around. And I put bubbles to make sure that you could. But when I was in here, I was actually able to get into the. Let me see if I can do this on the. When you get into the actual model, you can start moving these things around and seeing what the specular shine is that happens on it. We were actually trying different things where we try different. We actually had actual bound stuff that I was doing simulations of data binding, so that I could actually see where. Some of the interesting hard problems was like you see the slider tag that flies up, trying to make sure that that is visible. Josh and I had a conversation about that last night. He's like, why didn't you do billboarding on that? So that billboarding is like turning that label so that you could always see it. And one of the difficulties of doing the billboarding concept is that that thing has to make sure that it shows where, that it doesn't occlude into any of the models. So there's some difficulties around that. But as much as you can simulate, so if you can't actually directly manipulate the content, which a lot of times the data is not runtime or design time available, as much as you can simulate is going to make you move faster.
So I'm actually a developer, as you know. So maybe Josh, where do you put the switch actually? That's something that interests me lately. Do you actually change the binding in the XAML code when you want to link to the simulation data, or do you rather do that in the code behind to select your data source, or how do you do that?
So we've done that in several different ways. So there's an attached property that you can use when you're in design time, which is like design properties.isInDesignMode, something like that. you can use that to actually, when in design, use a fake, XML file, load an XML file or something like that, and when not in design, hit a web service or whatever your scenario might be. So we've done that a lot in the past. We've also done these like entirely separate applications, like what Nathan showed. A lot of times we get to the point where our applications are doing so much non-standard stuff that they won't load in Blend and they won't run in Blend, and then it's much, much more efficient for the designer to have their own test harness app as opposed to trying to figure out a way to get the other one to work. But yeah, so what we'll do a lot of times is have completely separate data for design time, XML file, or whatever. And another thing you can do is actually set the default value in your bindings. They call it fallback value. So if there's no data there, it will display something, right? So they'll always display something. So if you put fallback value in your bindings, that will also display it.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll hang around up here for a while if you guys want to come ask some more questions. Otherwise, thank you for coming and checking out our thing.